Awesome. Thank you both.
Your hairstyle look too similar
Potato.
from here.
This is disturbing.
All right. Happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome to the Potato Bath. Your chairs, Hannes Sofening and David Skenazi here, and we're going to be talking about potatoes. First, very importantly, the note well. Most of you here have been here for multiple days, but if you are participating in this meeting, you have agreed to the note well. This means in particular that you've agreed to follow the IETF Code of Conduct and its IPR policy, and we will be enforcing such things. So thank you very much. Our agenda today is we're going to start off with us chairs kind of introducing the topic a little bit, in particular kind of the history and what the solution space looks like a little bit, but intentionally we don't want to go too far deep into solutions, and we're going to have 5 different presenters with different use cases of why they think this technology in this space would be helpful, and then we'll kind of have an open mic session. This is a non-working group forming BOF. We don't have a charter to discuss, and part of our decision space here at the end of the meeting will be to see whether we want to create a new working group to work on this, or whether we put this in HTTP or somewhere else. Or decide not to do the work is also a potential outcome. All right. So as a little bit of background, the terminology reverse HTTP and similar things has been around for a while. The earliest draft I was able to find was from 2009, and we've had some from multiple people over the years. And as one more came out this year, our responsible AD decided, you know what, this topic seems to be interesting to a lot of people. Let's have a meeting to talk through it, see what happens. So very quick technical overview of what the concept is. Imagine you have 2 devices, a client and a server. The client is the small one on the left, wants to talk to a server on the right. And kind of the difference here is that the one on the right is kind of globally accessible from anywhere on the internet. The one on the left might not be. It could be like behind a firewall or behind a NAT, and is not necessarily reachable. So in your traditional model, like the client will establish a transport level connection with the server. So in TCP, that looks like a 3-way handshake. And once you have that, you end up with an HTTP connection between those 2 devices. And you know, you can use TCP or QUIC or whatever for that. And then in normal HTTP, then the client on the left sends HTTP requests to the one on the right, and the one on the right responds. The topic that we're discussing here, reverse HTTP, is when the HTTP requests go in the other direction, where kind of the roles are flipped. We're at the transport layer. The one on the left is the one initiating, but at the HTTP semantic layer, the one on the right is initiating. So that is kind of the overall space. And now we're going to go into why this could potentially be useful. So we're going to have our presenters come up. We've had allocated roughly 10 minutes for each. We'll put a timer, and we'll ask folks to stick to clarifying questions during that time, and to save any more substantive comments for the open mic afterwards. As Mark likes to say, a clarifying question means that you didn't understand something the presenter said. If it's a comment, it's not a clarifying question. All right. Then our first presenter, Kazuo. Share slides, Kazuo, confirm, and then
Thank you. Fantastic. So today I'm going to talk about the CDN reverse proxy use cases of PTTH. Next, please. Oh. Okay, thank you. So first, let's talk about terminology. PTTH is confusing because, as David pointed out, HTTP server that processes the client request is a TCP client. Or worse, it might act as an HTTP client set as a channel for acting as a HTTP server. So how should we call it? That's the first question. Next slide, please. So for the sake of this slide, we'd be calling it worker because it's a common term to refer to the HTTP server instance that does the work of processing the HTTP request. And per my understanding, other presenters have also changed their words to worker for the sake of better understanding of this meeting, and I appreciate that. Next, please. So let's go to the use cases. What's the first use case that we care of? That's the hidden servers use case. As David pointed out, CDNs have to connect to the backend servers, but the backend servers are typically behind the firewalls that have to be configured to allow access from the CDNs. And for that purpose, we have to CDNs have to provide the backend operators the IP addresses from which we connect to, which is a tedious and very inflexible way of configuration. But with PTTH, backend workers can establish outbound connections to CDNs by using the host names. So there's no longer a need to configure firewalls, and even better, CDNs can update the IP addresses dynamically via DNS. So if we set up a new POP or if you create a temporary POP, then we don't need to ask our customers, the backend operators, to update their firewall settings. So that's great. Next, please. The next use case is load balancing or dynamic scaling. The status quo is that when the backend server operator, our customers, want to add a new server so that it can handle increased load, the customer has to configure the CDN manually because they're now starting a new server or new load balancer at a different address. But with PTTH, backend operators can just clone their worker instances, PTTH worker instances, and then they will automatically connect to the CDN and start getting the requests. So there's no need for manual configuration, and everything works automatically. So that's another win. Next, please. The third benefit that we see is prioritization. At the moment, CDNs route to send the request to the backend servers, which are typically hidden behind a load balancer because just having one application server is not enough. So our customers set up multiple application servers behind a load balancer. And the problem here is that as the load increases, as we receive more and more requests at the same time, the only option we have is to send more requests to the backend because we don't know how much request the backend can handle, because the maximum concurrency that can be handled by all the backend servers are hidden behind the load balancer. So as the load increases, we continue sending more requests. And what happens is the request latency increases. But with PTTH, because all the workers connect to us, connect to CDNs, we can see exactly how much concurrency the workers as a whole has. And that allows us to prioritize requests when we see the concurrency being fully utilized. So, for example, handling things like bots, having PTTH enables us to prioritize requests, prioritizing humans above bots or other kind of user agents. And it helps us reduce the cost that our backend customers have to pay. Next, please. The fourth benefit that we see is that we can limit the concurrency of heavyweight requests, because so the status quo is that when you want to run a long-running request, you forward the request to you submit the request to a queue, and then the queue provides the request to a worker, and then the worker submits the response somehow, and while the HTTP client is polling for the response, which is very complicated. But since with PTTH, the reverse proxy can function as a queue, so that long-running requests could be rightly served as using the HTTP. So this is a simplicity gain that we hope to have. Next, please. So, but then the question becomes like, why do you need to standardize even when you can just implement your own PTTH to HTTP gateways and provide it to your CDN customers? The answer is that providing our custom software to our customers and asking them to install and run them is a tedious task, and there are security issues and those kind of things, or how to handle bugs, interoperability issues. So the idea here is that if we could standardize PTTH, then ordinary HTTP servers can implement PTTH, so that each CDN doesn't need to develop and provide a custom software to the CDN customers. And it simplifies the deployment, and it improves the stability of the design and increases security. And for what's worth, during the HTTP workshop last year, which is a separate event from IETF, but it's a gathering of HTTP practitioners, I'd say that multiple HTTP server vendors expressed their interest into implementing this kind of stuff like PTTH. So it's not just the CDNs who are interesting. Next, please. And the other frequently asked question that I hear is, how do you authenticate the PTTH workers? Because web is based on the web PKI model. And my answer from a CDN operator's perspective is that the connection behind the CDN that goes to the origin is not part of the web PKI, because the CDN is the origin. So the web PKI is about the client to the CDN, and between the CDN to the workers, it's a private connection. So we don't need to care about web PKI. We can authenticate using whatever login credentials that suits for the CDN use case. Next, please. Right. So summary. Basically, we have these 4 benefits, which is simplified and flexible management of hidden servers. And it also facilitates autonomous scaling, load balancing, and fine-grained prioritization. And it enhances the processing of heavyweight requests using HTTP. And by standardizing PTTH, we can eliminate the need for installing custom gateways when providing PTTH-like solutions. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Kazuho. Any clarifying questions for Kazuho? And as a reminder, please use the Mitecho queue so that we can have an orderly conversation.
Yep.
All right, Aram, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, but you're a little faint. If you could get closer to the mic.
Yeah, I'll just talk a little bit closer to the mic. Thank you.
Perfect, that works.
Can we go back to the diagram page for a second, please? It was one of the first slides. Right there is fine. Please keep going. Yeah, right there is perfect. So can you please explain, based on your comments, I was trying to get a sense for the overhead that you're introducing in the management of the load information that's now coming from I guess you're calling it worker, coming from the worker to the CDN. Can you please talk a little bit about where you are seeing additional overhead? Where's the down?
Right. So the status quo is that because proxies connect to workers, the firewalls managed by the worker has to be configured manually to allow proxies connecting to the workers. But
thank you. Yeah, I was not talking about the configuration component. I was talking strictly about when it's in operation. All of the requests that are coming from the worker to the CDN? How is that being managed? Thank you.
All right, so I think it's kind of a solution, but for us, basically, we receive the connection from the worker, and then simply start sending HTTP requests from the proxy to worker on that connection. So there's no additional overhead. It's just doing the connection in the reverse way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Martin Seemann, Small Step. One clarifying question regarding authentication. You said you don't want to specify anything there, but if that's like some bespoke protocol that just works for one CDN, then this doesn't work if you just want to implement this in all kinds of web servers, right? So you would at least have to say you can use some kind of TLS client certificates or HE basic auth. So there's some.
Right. So it depends on the. Right, so it depends on how you would set up the reverse channel. But if you use TLS, then it could be a certificate. If you use HTTP for setting up the channel, it could be any HTTP authentication method.
Emil?
Yep. Hi, Emil from Orange. So what are these hidden server you told you have in?
Right. So these hidden servers are typically the audience. For example, CDN has many customers, like many websites from e-commerce to news websites. They have to run their own logic, so they are hosted by themselves, typically inside the cloud providers. So CDNs connect to those servers, which are protected behind the firewall, so that they cannot be accessed directly from other locations other than the CDNs. So that's what the hidden servers are.
So the hidden server are not the same as the workers?
Correct.
Okay, good, thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Alvestra. I was a little bit puzzled about one piece. You had, I think it was 2 slides back when you talked about the queue in the CDN. Because the first drawing said that when the request hits the CDN kicks it off to the worker immediately. And the second slide said that there was a queue at the CDN where the worker would pull a request out. Which is it?
Right. So it depends on how you want to run the proxy or how the customer configures the CDN.
Okay, so which of those two are you proposing to standardize? One or both?
So regarding the standards, I think we don't need to specify a particular way. It's about how the CDN wants to run the queue. And even if in the single case of simply serving web requests in general, you typically forward the request as fast as you can. But if the concurrency becomes full, then you nevertheless have to build a queue and then serve the request using the queue.
All right, and speaking of queues, we've joined the mic one. Thank you, Kazuho.
Thank you.
All right, and no, let's see, I have to get slide control back. All right.
Hello, everybody. My name is Marius Kleidl, and in this presentation, I would like to explore the idea of moving control of the proxying process more towards the worker/hidden server side through reverse HTTP. With the current setups that we have, let's assume again we have a load balancer, a CDN, a proxy that sits in front of the origin server. In those situations, the proxy connects to the origin server and then forwards the request through this connection. We can see this by the really faint arrows down here, where the requests are flowing from the client through the proxy to the origin. The configuration for the proxying process is then usually supplied via some proprietary out-of-band mechanism towards the proxy. The origin server actually has rather no control over this configuration. This can be just using some APIs to, for example, if you're using a cloud provider, or this is some static configuration that you push towards the proxy. But the origin server has basically nothing to say in that process, which isn't ideal in all cases. With reverse HTTP, we could turn this around a bit. Because the worker is establishing a connection to the proxy, the worker is this hidden server again, it can actually supply configuration, or it could supply configuration towards the proxy. This is shown here with the rather thick arrow. In whatever format that is out of the way now. But the proxy then still forwards the requests, but the worker has something to say in the configuration. It says origin here, but think of that as the worker term that Kazuo established previously, or hidden server, or whatever you in your mental model you have right now. The idea is that the worker therefore has more control over the proxying process, especially when there are different workers inside of your setup. And the worker actually gets a really fine-grained per connection control over the proxying process. Now, you might think, okay, what exactly does this configuration, or what could it include? And there's some possibilities about this. This touches on what Kazuo said before about load balancing and prioritization. Through this mechanism, the worker is more in control over how much load, how many requests it receives. You could imagine that the worker says, per connection towards this proxy, I want to receive at most 100 concurrent requests, or at most 10,000 requests per minute or per second or whatever. And then by opening new connections or closing them, you effectively give the worker control over how much load it wants to receive. And depending on, for example, its CPU configuration or CPU utilization, it can then determine, okay, I have too much load, I want to reduce it, so I'm going to close connections, or I see, okay, I have spare resources, I can open up new connections. And therefore, you move control over this, for example, the request rate to the worker, which usually knows best how much it could handle. But you can also take this a bit further. In many cases, you have you could imagine a worker that handle requests only for a specific part of the application. For example, you have a service that handles authentication. You have another service that handles payment, for example. And you could, through reverse HTTP, allow the worker to effectively instruct the proxy what requests it wants to receive. So for example, the authentication worker would then say, please only give me requests with, for example, the URI for your authentication service, or the hostname for your authentication service. You could imagine this works by specifying some selector for that matches paths or host names or headers or entire URIs. And therefore, each worker can select what requests it wants to serve. Another mechanism that would be easily enabled by reverse HTTP is connection draining as well. Now you imagine the worker wants to shut down, either because it wants to reload or because your cluster is scaling down or whatever. All it has to do is basically instruct the proxy to not forward any new requests. This could be just a low-level signal that is already included by whatever connection mechanism we decide on using. And then it says, okay, please no new requests anymore. It can still serve the current requests that are running. But the benefit is that the worker then knows when it can finally shut down. Once it has closed the last connection toward the proxy, it knows, okay, I'm done, I'm finished. I can now initiate my entire shutdown. And you don't have to rely on any external auto-scaling mechanism or external signals that indicate the worker, okay, now you're actually fine. You can shut down. The proxy is not going to forward anything to you anymore. So that would be another potential configuration control that the worker would gain through reverse HTTP. All of these things are currently possible. That's, of course, obvious. But they always have to be supplied using some proxy or proxy-specific way of configuration. With reverse HTTP or PTTH, the worker can directly communicate those signals to the proxy in potentially a standardized way, and therefore giving the worker more control over this proxying process. Of course, there would still be some configuration flags that you want to supply to the proxy directly. That's it's likely obvious. But the worker will gain some more control that can make your setup a bit more flexible and a bit more scalable. Yeah, that's all I have regarding this point.
Thank you, Marius. Any clarifying questions? Go ahead.
Thank you. This is Erin Welling. So I'm thinking in terms of security here. Okay, before you know the updates, the configuration updates are more centralized in the traditional manner. Now you're pushing configuration privileges to workers. Okay, and that you know, we'd have to really think about whether there's concerns related to that. I haven't seen you address the security implications of handing over configuration privileges to workers, and how that could be abused. It seems to me that when you distribute privileges like that, that there is a greater opportunity for things to go awry. A lot more control has to be established. I just think about, you know, the possibility, say, for example, there's an insider threat. Okay. Now you've given this worker, not only is this person a threat, but now they have privileges that they did not have before. And what are the implications of that? So did you want to address that, or I guess that could be a comment for later. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. This is Hannes. Your concerns or your feedback is definitely valid. We asked Marius to specifically focus on the use cases and not so much on sort of looking at what possible ways there could be to address these authorization aspects. One could shop around in the IETF to find ways to do that. There are authorization protocols, but certainly there are things that need to be worked out here if we want to support those scenarios. That's certainly true.
And I'll repeat that while this point is absolutely valid, let's keep these kinds of non-clarifying questions for the open mic later, please.
Thank you very much. Ted Hardy speaking. I guess the question I have here is there seem to be two possibilities in what you just said. And if you could distinguish between them, I'd appreciate it. One of them is you have Potato setting up a connection, and above it, you had a set of control protocols. Let's call it CDNI over Potato. And in the other, you're actually using the HTTP mechanisms themselves to control the proxy. So it's not like a side channel above Potato that's doing this. It's actually the HTTP primitives. Like the most basic primitives, I don't want any more traffic at this worker. I'm going to close the HTTP connection that I made that opened it. Can you clarify which one you think is in scope for the use case you just described?
So I'm just imagining here, but if I understand it correctly, so for example, the connection draining, that could be just performed using the HTTP transport itself, the already existing one. When you want to, for example, set a maximum request rate, that could be done when the worker is connecting to the proxy through some header field, for example.
Okay.
So you don't have to have like a separate control plane or different protocol on top of that, but could use existing mechanisms that exist in HTTP.
Okay, I think we'll return to this in the open discussion because this gets to a much larger scope question.
Thank you, Ted. And I think that's it for now. Thank you, Marius. All
Thank
right.
you.
And then I forget who's next. Then next is Hrant from Meta. If you want to click the share slides button at the bottom of your screen, we'll be able to approve it for you, and then you'll be able to control the slides.
I see request screen share and request slides.
Yep, request slides. And there we go. Approve, and then you should see a set of slides. Click the one with your name. All right, there we go.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Perfect. Sweet. And I can't get my video working, but I guess that's fine.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Hey everyone, I'm Hrant. I work on Zero Trust Networking at Meta. And so a bit of background. We operate a bunch of different environments that are kind of split off from our corporate and production environments, and they tend to contain use cases that just don't belong in any other environment. They might have like novel hardware, or just for security reasons, they need to be split off from other environments. And the typical access story there is that you have some sort of L3 connectivity to the corporate environment, and you have firewall holes just for the things that you want to be able to do in this one-off environment, poke through between the corporate and the one-off environment. And what that does is that forces our users onto a VPN whenever they're working remotely to be able to perform their tasks in this one-off environment. So what my team does is we operate a bunch of layer 7 products that allow us to use HTTP as kind of a substrate for transporting not only HTTP based use cases, but also TCP and UDP based use cases, such as SSH, which I'm using for illustration here. So this is kind of the state of the art. We would stand up some kind of a load balancer in the one-off environment, expose it to the internet. The load balancer performs all the authentication that we need it to. And then we have a client running on the user's laptop that allows them to interact with that environment. So in this scenario, SSH on the laptop talks to a client software on the laptop, which then sets up a secure HTTPS tunnel to the load balancer in the one-off environment, which then talks to SSHD on a particular node. This is very cumbersome and annoying to do for every single environment, not to mention like the potential security ramifications if our security posture in the load balancer were ever to be compromised in any way, because by necessity, the load balancer has to be exposed to the internet because we don't know where the user might be coming from. So this would be kind of an idealized picture of this layer 7 approach, where we have some kind of a reflector open to the internet. We have the client connect to it just as it did in the previous slide. But the one-off environment, instead of being connected to by the reflector, connects to the reflector itself. So imagine some kind of piece of software running on individual nodes in the one-off environment and publishing the resources on the node to this reflector. and then the reflector taking inbound requests from the client and connecting them to to the requested node. So the reflector in this scenario sort of subsumes the responsibility of DNS, BGP. It sort of establishes a point-to-point link between the client and server without them being able to talk to each other directly. So this could be accomplished with H2C in just plain HTTP. And that gets us stream connectivity, that gets us normal HTTP use cases. But there are multiple layers of flow control. It's just generally cumbersome. And obviously, that doesn't really do the trick if you want datagram semantics. We would like datagram semantics because some protocols are just UDP based. Like if we wanted to do anything UDP based, we'd have all of the nastiness associated with proxying UDP over TCP. We could put HTTP3 in HTTP3, and that probably solves most of our flow control issues. It gives us datagram semantics. We just have a quick connection inside of quick datagrams, but that is sort of wasteful with MTU size. That would eat into our datagrams MTUs even further than just a single layer of quick would, which is already kind of a big deal for certain protocols that are not super aware of the path MTU. Some UDP protocols are just not very smart. So an idealized protocol in my mind would minimize the number of RTTs. It should be pretty much ready to go as soon as the substrate connection is established. It would allow datagram semantics and try to maximize the MTU. It would still allow for some sort of TCP fallback if the network path between the reflector and the server is not permissive to UDP. It would include some sort of semantics for the reflector or intermediate proxies, because in reality, we would not have the reflector facing the internet. We'd have like another layer of L7 reverse proxies, load balancing to it. So it would, an idealized protocol would probably have semantics for the reflector or the intermediate proxies to do maybe goaways, maybe per stream goaways. And yeah, ideally, it would be possible to have multiple hops for this reverse HTTP protocol so that, yeah, we can do load balancing. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have.
Awesome. Thank you. Do we have any questions for Hrant? Marius.
Could you go to the third slide again? I think there was about an L. The next one, please. The next slide. Ah, yeah, that one. Is that a solution that you currently have deployed, or was this more a imagination how this would play out if you had something like this in production?
We don't operate this topology specifically, but yeah, this is kind of our bread and butter. We use HTTP as a substrate for connectivity into a bunch of environments.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. All right, I think that's all for questions. Thank you for the presentation, Hrant. I think next up is Yaroslav.
Hello, everybody. My name is Yaroslav. I am from Zscaler. So today I'm going to share with you a few use cases that I regularly have to deal with where standardized reverse HTTP for connect would be beneficial. So in traditional remote access VPNs, you have client that connects to VPN concentrator and typically obtains IP address, establishes some sort of tunnel interface, and then transport carries IP packets encapsulated in the encrypted tunnel. This connectivity is typically bidirectional, and we have plethora of technologies available to make it happen: IQ2, WireGuard, most recently Connect IP over all sorts of HTTP. And then there are, of course, a bunch of proprietary or non-standardized mechanisms to carry IP packets within TLS. There are a bunch of solutions that are called SSL VPNs or TLS VPNs. There is another architecture to help facilitate remote access. I don't think this term is defined in any standard body. It's called ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access. So I will use architecture that my current employer calls ZTNA, and I know a number of other vendors calls ZTNA. So if your definition of ZTNA is different, I beg for forgiveness. The idea is that you have a client and a proxy. Client is sending outbound connections to that proxy. And then you have, let's call it worker for consistency, that also establishes outbound connection to the same proxy. And then proxy similarly proxies or brokers the connection. So in this architecture, typically data is encapsulated on layer 4. So there are no IP addresses or TCP UDP headers. It's just raw TCP data or UDP datagrams that are somehow encapsulated and carried over. Now, for client 2 proxy, we have a number of great standards that are developed in HTTP and Mask working groups. So we have Connect, we have templated Connect TCP. For TCP, we have Connect UDP. They're a great fit, and they potentially offer cross-vendor interoperability, which is fantastic. Situation is not that great on the other side. So when you have worker establishing connection to the proxy and expecting to receive inbound connections there. Of course, we could potentially use Connect IP, but that means that we need to convert those layer 4 flows into IP. We need to create TCP stack and do lots of other work, but also carrying IP packets over whatever is not always great because you have MTU issues. If your medium happens to be TCP and you carry IP packet within it that has another TCP, you end up with TCP within TCP, which creates a bunch of performance issues. So it's not great. There is draft mask connect UDP listen that was referred to a few times in the chat. It's great for UDP. It could potentially be extended for ZTNA-like use cases. So today it relies on IP addresses. Nothing stops anyone to define some capsules that would signal FQDNs instead. So again, potentially it could be extended to UDP. Creating something similar for TCP would be quite challenging because you don't want to multiplex multiple TCP flows into the same stream. You really want to keep them separate for all sorts of reasons. Another potential option is, of course, you could just reverse roles after transport is ready. So you establish quick connection or TCP connection, and then you just swap over the roles. It would obviously violate standards, but one can do that. There is a benefit of potential benefit of do communication in both directions. So for example, proxy could send configuration update towards the connector, but connector could send some kind of maybe health check message towards the proxy. Another use case that is very, very similar is for actually proxy establishing connection to the client. There are a few technologies that are out there that are widely used for remote administration or for user assist. Things like RDP, SSH, VNC, or SCCM, it's more legacy endpoint, enterprise endpoint management protocol, but still widely deployed. It requires for remote workstations accept inbound connectivity over a VPN, so traditional HTTP connect UDP and other mechanisms do not allow that, so it would be great to address it. So these are properties that I see of potential solutions to address those use cases. So it would be great to have server-initiated requests over HTTP 3 or HTTP 2. Would be great to have flow encapsulation similar to Connect or templated Connect TCP and Connect UDP, so we don't need to reinvent things again just to make them work in the other direction. It would be great to be able to do both forward and reverse requests over the same HTTP transport to minimize potential overhead. There are a few, obviously, proposed solutions in this space, and there are plenty of proprietary solutions provided by different vendors, so it's certainly something that can be done. So any clarifying questions?
Emil, I see you've requested slide access. Is that intentional, or did you have a question?
It's not intentional. Sorry.
Oh, okay, no worries. Kazuho, go ahead.
Kazuho, can you go back one slide? So in this slide, you say regular and reverse requests over the same HTTP transport. Do you mean sending them on the same HTTP connection, or do you mean using one HTTP connection in one direction and another connection?
Over the same HTTP connection. So for example, when you have remote user connecting to the proxy, it's always great to keep number of connections as close to one as possible to minimize troubleshooting, overhead, deal with flow control, and all other issues. So probably I should have said the same HTTP connection rather than transport.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for clarifying question.
Thank you. I think that's it on questions. Thank you, Yaroslav.
Thank you.
Lucas.
Hello, everyone. I need to eat the mic. Potato. Okay, I'm Lucas. I work at Cloudflare. I'm going to talk about some use cases we have for potatoes. And I just want to make it clear, I'm channeling some of the product teams here. While I do work on protocols at Cloudflare and consult with their usage, the reversing of HTTP and dialing in and out are run by other teams. So if I say something and it's not clear or it's wrong, if people subsequently find it's wrong, blame me, but forgive me too. I'll try my best though. I'm last, I think, so I just want to keep it really short and sweet. We've heard from others about their use cases. I would say Cloudflare has both. We support both use cases. We have customers who want them. I wouldn't say they want them at the same time, because I don't know if we do that, but there are concrete cases where we want the CDN itself to be able to interact with an origin server, but do it in a way where the origin server connects into the CDN. This reverse proxy kind of mode that we use. And there's other cases with zero trust where it's nothing to do about a HTTP origin server, but we're more other protocols. And we support these use cases today. We have a thing called Cloudflare Tunnel. There's a document you can link. We go into a lot more detail about how people can set this thing up. If you're a customer of Cloudflare and you have what we call a zone, and you sign that thing up to Cloudflare, and then you can install this tunnel. The headline description there is that you can connect HTTP web servers and other protocols safely to Cloudflare. This is a diagram I just stole from those documents and then put some red labels at the top to indicate that, like, if you just relabel things, we're probably talking exactly the same stuff. When I was just looking at this a bit earlier, what I found interesting is, if you go to the documents, it talks about how, one of the use cases is you can have a server and you can hide the IP of it, like we've heard before. But this diagram doesn't talk about any of the connection stuff we've been talking about here, like it's irrelevant to customers. What they need in this example is a customer's browser makes a HTTP request. It comes into Cloudflare's network and hits our edge server. We do some of our own internal business logic to find out where we're trying to route this to, where is the origin of that HTTP content. And then we forward that request to what we would call here the worker, which is Cloudflare's Cloudflare D agent that is running on the customer's server and is acting as this worker process. And what that does is stuff to be able to connect into the web server that is running on the customer's server on localhost. But this could be other protocols like SSH or whatever you want. And that's it. That's all I've got to say. To my mind, the protocol that we might pick could be H2. I don't care. Like this diagram shows the use case and the functionality that we want. And yes, if there's interest in doing this work, we'll figure out that protocol. In this case, because this is a piece of software that does run and does dial back to Cloudflare's network, they have to have a protocol. That so happens to be based on Quick. But, you know, does it need to be? I can't speak to the requirements or choices that they've made today in this presentation, but I would be able to channel those in the future should there be work in the space that happens. That's all I have.
All right, thanks, Lucas. Any clarifying questions for Lucas? All right, then.
Okay, so while Lucas walks back to his seat,
Actually, hold on.
okay.
Well, I've learned my lesson from the BOF on Monday, which is that I'm going to invite all the proponents, as in everyone who's presented a use case, to please come up on stage so then they can help answer questions. So don't go down to your seat, Lucas. And let me present the right slide for this.
Yeah, so to summarize what you have just heard, so we had initially the history of this work and what led into this BOF. You've been given a few use cases and additionally also some requirements, some selected requirements, definitely not a complete list. And also a little bit of terminology. You can see if, like, from the presentations, people hinted to it, a different terminology, worker, proxy, and all this good stuff. So maybe there's some alignment needed, but yeah, questions for this gentleman? Not just pictures taken. I see.
Ted Hardy, thank you all. I think you each presented valuable use cases that kind of hint where we might go with this. But I want to dial back a moment and say that there are two very different scopes here, right? And one of the scopes is the very basic, we would like to be able to take the transport initiator and make it the HTTP server. That's functionally what Mark Lenzner's draft did in 2009. It opened an HTTP connection to what was acting as a server, offered an upgrade to a reverse HTTP, and then they just changed roles. So what happened was you had a HTTP client become an HTTP server by an upgrade in HTTP, and everything that happened was truly at the HTTP semantic layer from that point on. Some of what I'm hearing from the CDNI use case seems very close to that original level, but it's also adding the concept of some control features that are not in the original, maybe some standardization of headers and others. And as we get to the zero trust and other aspects of this, I'm more and more reminded of the plenary topic we had a while ago of where is the new waste of the internet? Historically, it was IP, it became TCP IP or UDP IP. It became over time HTTP as the waste of the internet, with a couple of different transports underneath it, TLS or quick. Because of that, some of your use cases are actually nothing to do with HTTP as a delivery of resources across the network, but HTTP as the waste of the internet for other things. And I believe that the scope of delivering that, a transport initiation that allows the flows to switch direction for all of the things that are on that new waste of the internet, is a very much larger scope of work. I'm not saying it's not a doable scope of work or an important scope of work, but I think we have to recognize that if you're going to say, this is going to allow me to do HTTP in this direction, people are going to layer everything on top of it that they layered on top of HTTP in the other direction. And that gives you a whole bunch of questions to answer, like how much gets standardized? Are these headers in fact standardized, or are they application specific? Are the authorization mechanisms going to be appropriate across all of these different uses? Are the encapsulations going to be sensible if in fact in one of these cases you open a transport connection, reverse it, and now what you've got is a connect UDP session or an OHI relationship. This is, if you want to tackle all of that, that's a very large scope of work where resurrecting what Mark Lenzner did and bringing it up to HTTP3 is very much smaller, but it would not get you all the way to the new waste of the internet. So I think when you get to the point of writing a charter, and I understand this is not a working group forming BOF, you have to decide where on that line you want to draw the scope of the work, because the deliverables and the amount of work are startlingly different. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted, before you walk away. So you're completely right that we have some of a spectrum here. Also from if we take the historical work into account, it's a broad scale. And what we want to get feedback on is, like, where is the audience, including you, on that spectrum? Do you see use cases that are closer to the original proposal, or are you into what you call the new waste of the internet?
I'm a big believer that you do the simple things first and figure out how to elaborate them later. And I think the CDN use cases are closer to the standard HTTP use case in that they're functionally an unreachable host server in a standard HTTP exchange. And I think defining an unreachable host server for a standard HTTP exchange is work, but it's very doable work in a relatively low amount of time, where figuring out how to take that and turn it into the new waste of the internet, you might actually find that it's not the right place anymore. That in fact, what we're going to do for the new waste of the internet is to allow you to open a quick connection from one initiator and have the quick flows go in either direction, or you use something very similar to WebSockets or something like that. But I think that the CDN use cases are the simplest, and I would personally tackle those, see how I went before trying to go further.
Yeah, that's in general a sort of well-proven approach, to start small and then go further from there. I wanted to also add on the new waste topics, like, it's not that our presenters here wanted to create something sort of completely new in the internet and change the entire hourglass, so to speak, but instead I think it's observation and recognition that some things have changed over the years, started many, many years ago. So it's not that we are sort of cooking up some revolutionary thing here, and anyone shouldn't be surprised. But do you guys want to respond to that in any way?
Yeah, I'll comment briefly. So there are, at least for me, there are two main motivations to bring this idea to IETF. One is cross-vendor interoperability, which is beneficial in general for everybody. But secondly, as was mentioned by a number of commentators, there are many moving parts there. It's so easy to get things horribly wrong in terms of authorization, authentication properties, flow control, what have you. So discussing this at IETF would allow in generally make internet a better place.
Martin.
Yeah, Martin Thompson. I think this work is pretty good, but like Ted, I think the focus on the CDN case is probably the easiest one to do. Unfortunately, I think you also get all of the other things for free if you do it that way. And so,
explain us.
So Yaroslav talked about doing connect in reverse directions on connections, and I don't think that's a good thing to keep in scope for this group. But if you imagine the case that Lucas just showed on screen, where you have this agent sitting there, and even if this was an integral part of the server that's running on the worker, that agent would then connect up to the server and say, I would like to take over the serving of some portion of the space on this name. And the server says, yes, fine, that you get that. And then the server then receives a connect IP or whatever it is request. That connect IP request is going all the way through onto the worker, and the worker is then serving that. Maybe that's a bad thing, but that's what you get because you just bought the whole thing. You just bought HTTP. And I think that's a good thing for this situation, but I think we have to acknowledge that that's the deal that we're making here when we come into this. So I would like to see a recognition of that in any charter that comes out of this one. I think probably the biggest challenge for me in this space in getting to the minimal viable thing, because I think Ted is right in that minimal viable is what we need to aim for, is this authorization question, is how the worker presents to the reflector or the server or whatever it is and says, I'd like to take over the whole thing, part of it, whatever, how it establishes that. And I think the solutions that we're seeing in that space are relatively sketchy. And I think if we're going to be serious about that, that's something that we need to sort out with a little bit more clarity. So maybe that's work to do for the working group, but I think that would be a big chunk of the work that has to go on there.
Hey, Mike Blanche. So agree with a lot of what Ted said there. Start simple. From a pure selfish perspective, use cases and problem space. I am a user of the Cloudflare D, and I don't use it for HTTP. So a solution for that I'm sure it's a problem for Cloudflare, like deploying this software across many different types of platform, different systems, keeping it updated is a nightmare. And also for the customer, if they want to move from using Cloudflare to someone else, they then have to go and install something from someone else as well. I'm sure it is a problem. So I believe in the use case and the problem space. I'm not so qualified to answer some of the other questions, but I agree with you. Perhaps keep it simple, focus on what the simplest problem to solve to get something going, and take it from there. Thank you.
Hi, this is Theo Dimitrakos, Kent, University of Kent and Huawei. Now, given that this is a both session, and although I have to say that I agree with what Ted said before, and that the risk of going a bit wilder, I would like to share my interest in this both. So one of the concerns that I have and that I see happen and that I see very often is that we do have bots or AI agents on devices or in enterprises that are interacting on behalf of users with other different or with services further away. In my view, one of the best ways of controlling the behavior of those requests is by means of enforcing some executable policy on what you would consider a reverse proxy, be it a corporate policy or be a policy that comes from a user. So you can call it user intent, you can call it whatever else you want. My obvious question, okay, is whether what we're discussing here in terms of potato, let's put it like that, would be a forum where the enforcement of those things in terms of how this would actually work, or from the proxy point of view, would be within scope or not. Again, with the risk, having understood the risk that was mentioned before. Okay, but I'd like to put this on the table. Okay, thank you.
If someone wants to respond, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, folks will respond if they feel they have anything to add. But thanks for your sort of sense of the use case you would like to see supported.
Alessandro Ghedini, Cloudflare. So we've seen, sort of commercial use cases for this, but I could imagine like a much simpler use case where I have a virtual machine in some cloud environment and I want to expose some, home website that I made, and then I can install some open source solution that somehow integrates with my web server that is provided by some project, and then my web server that is provided by another project. And so I definitely think there's value in working on this, and specifically working on a protocol that is not company specific, where you could potentially implement it in different open source solutions. I don't entirely understand MT's point about having to deal with the authorization problem, because in my mind, that would be left to the sort of integration of the protocol into whatever solution you end up deploying. So like maybe a company exposes some API for a customer to authenticate to, and then get, I don't know, like a key. So I feel like the very smallest scope here is implementing the HTTP interactions between the client and the server to establish some kind of session, and then leaving all of that other complexity to figure out for the actual integration into specific use cases. So for the question of should this be a new working group, I don't think so. I don't know that HTTP-based is the best solution, but that seems like the one that in my mind applies the most.
Actually, I don't have much to add on that one.
I quickly want to talk to the working group versus not working group aspect. So there's obviously the possibility to do work in existing working group. That's always an option, or to branch it out if it's a community that is kind of self-contained and could do the work there much faster. This is largely a discussion of the area director ultimately, or the area directors, to decide on how they want to balance work and manage load. But of course, your feedback would be appreciated there too. I'm sure the area directors are interested to hear your thoughts on this and what the right place would be to do this work. Assuming that, as the previous commenter said, that he was obviously in support, so he wants to have the work happening somewhere. But
yeah, and to add to that, the sense I'm getting from the room is that on the first kind of 3 questions there, haven't heard anyone speak up and say that these use cases don't make sense, that they're not real, and that we don't want to do this. I'm feeling like positive energy in terms of doing this work. So if you disagree with that, please absolutely do speak up. And then, yeah, we'll resume the queue. Philip.
Hi, Philip Diesel, SAP. To add to the list of use cases, we have a small product called Cloud Connector that is probably involved at least in half of all your business transactions at the moment. And it basically works by an on-premises system connecting into the cloud, and afterwards getting WebSocket traffic with things from cloud integrations to the on-premise application. Being able to put this on a little bit more standardized basis helps with things like auditing, helps with things with like certifications. It allows to go for much more modern HTTP, and therefore I think it's a good thing to work on and would be a really good substrate for the next version of that thing. So I'm definitely of the opinion we are solving the right problem at the right layer here. But I would honestly suggest really making sure that we don't do this in HTTP-BIS, because the HTTP-BIS is already a really big zoo. And I'm pretty sure that adding such a big elephant to the zoo might make it more complicated to have all the other animals getting the right place. So, thank you.
Thank you, Philip. And maybe you can share some requirements from your solution with the rest of the group, for example, to in a mail or so, or later in discussions. That would be really interesting.
Yes, definitely.
Benjamin.
Hi, Ben Schwartz, Meta. I wanted to come back to the use cases and questions that Ted Hardy brought up. So I've attempted to draw protocol drafts that would do something like this a couple of times, and the simplest versions were possibly even simpler than the version that Ted was talking about, where you just take the entire connection and flip it. And I think I want to coin a term here. We'll see if it sticks. I heard Ted talking about something that I would call origin slicing. This idea that a worker might want to claim one fraction of an origin for itself, some subset of paths or methods or something. And I think that's really interesting. It sounds like there's some demand for that. In terms of scope, what I would like to see is, I do not think that we, at this point, should be trying to define any kind of language for origin slicing. But it sounds like we probably should have some kind of basically opaque deployment defined box for that kind of configuration information. So if you, the worker and the proxy, want to talk to each other about what kinds of things you're going to share on this connection, we should provide a channel for you to have that conversation. And what you do with that channel is probably not standards relevant at this time.
Hey, Ben. Yes, that really resonates, at least with my use cases. In some, quite often this is called, I believe, service discovery, when you have proxy and worker somehow negotiating what can and cannot be sent, and sometimes there is an extra context involved. So maybe a worker can respond to certain queries for some users, for some authorized users, but not for others. So it is, I think, an interesting problem space to explore further and define what is within the standard and what could be extensions on top of that.
Yeah, so I think hopefully that gets us down to a fairly manageable scope, but it does mean that you need a little more than just bare HTTP in the opposite direction. So we have to give that some thought. The other topic we were talking about is where to do this. Personally, I think my dream for this would be that we split HTTP-BIS, because HTTP-BIS deals heavily in a bunch of stuff that is essentially HTTP semantic and HTTP transport, and they really don't have much to say to each other. So I would be interested in saying, okay, we're going to take all of the basically transport specific stuff and do that in one place. But I also think that a focused working group would be a little more similar to how these kinds of things have been handled recently.
Thanks, Ben. And we see Mark later in the queue, so I think we'll get an opinion on that one. Miriam.
Mia Kuhlevin Eriksson. So I think there are valid use cases and we should do some work here in the IETF. On the other questions, I'm less sure, because the solution could be very small or a little bit bigger, and we didn't really talk about what the solution space is. Not even sure we have all the same solution in our head. So if it's something small, it could be an existing working group. If it's something bigger, we might need an own working group. But I feel we didn't talk enough about this. But I'm supporting doing the work somewhere in the IETF.
Thank you.
And now is the time we talk about the dispatch question. Hearing this discussion, I think that the exercise of developing a charter would be a good exercise regardless of where this ends up. There seems to be enough of confusion about the scope of the work that it would be really good to just go through that exercise and understand what it is that people have in their minds. That doesn't necessarily mean that that needs to turn into a working group, but I'm starting to lean toward that direction. I think this is different enough from the sorts of things that HTTP Biz typically manages that it probably be reluctantly a small group. It'll be all the same people, so I don't think it's really going to be that big of a deal, but it means that we, as much as possible, get more session time at these meetings, which maybe work out for the better. I do want to push back a little bit on Ben's orange slice thing. It's a potato and it's an orange now. So potatoes and oranges. Ultimately, I don't think you get to decide whether there's slicing or not happening in this case, because if there's something fronting one of these things, it's going to have the ability to exercise discretion as to what it forwards on to a worker. And so I think naturally there is slicing. And if you sort of pretend that there's no slicing, then you ultimately are deluding yourself on that point. So I think we'll probably have to tackle it as well. I'm sorry to be the person coming up here saying that the scope is larger and it cannot be any smaller, but that's just how it is.
So just as maybe a clarification for the I use the Cloudflare Tunnel D on my origin server. That is effectively a VPS I use to run all my rando stuff, and it does some things still directly Cloudflare will directly connect to because I haven't configured them into that tunnel worker thing that dispatches them to the right ones. Others do. I think it's already there and it's going to come, even despite the naming term you might give it, whether we want it or not.
So, Mark Nottingham. This all sounds a little familiar. There's a reason why we were hesitating to adopt this work in the HTTP working group. Uneasiness about the scope and the follow-on effects of the work. We've been here before. So is the question of, and that's not to discourage the work. I think it's great that there's people who are interested in doing this. I would be the last to say don't do it, but poorly scoped or confusingly scoped work makes me nervous. If it was tightly scoped, I think it would be entirely appropriate for those simpler use cases, entirely appropriate for the HTTP working group. If it's kind of what we're talking about here, let's take that risk and put it in another bucket, perhaps. Ben talked about separating semantic and transport in HTTP, and I think Roy Fielding is probably screaming, and he doesn't know why right now. Having them together in the same place is a feature, not a bug. So.
Just a quick response to that. So of course, the idea would be to come up with a description of a scope that fits the proponents and those who are interested in doing the work. So we are obviously not middle of that phase to work this out, and it will take a number of iterations. So, but yeah.
Mia Kühlewind again. Sorry, I forgot. I wanted to comment on the middle question here. Is HTTP the right layer? And it seems like everybody who went to the mic was assuming that this is something on the HTTP layer. Nobody really replied to the question. I don't have an opinion, but I would like really to understand why people have this assumption. Are there specific things that only HTTP can provide, or is it just kind of the environment we are used to, and that's why we're trying to put it there?
I can respond from my experience. Well, HTTP, one of great benefits of HTTP that it works. It tends to be allowed through all sorts of environments. And non-HTTP protocols in some weird environments do not work. They're getting access lists or DPI'd away. From vendor practitioner perspective, that's a huge benefit of using HTTP as a transport. I'm sure there are many others.
I can add some more like personal commentary on that too. One of the benefits of HTTP is that it's solved the semantics of the thing you're trying to do is kind of independent of the layer 4 protocol that you're using. It can support both TCP and QUIC. If you have something new, you will probably start the discussion with, am I going to dial from my worker to the proxy using a transport protocol? And if I do, what is it? Okay, I now need to create an environment and an ecosystem that can do both. Potentially retread a lot of the work we've already done that took years to get that right. And not even right at the protocol level, but coherent in people's minds about what it means to translate between those things. So that's kind of why I see it. I'm a Mask enthusiast. We've done a lot of this work. I would hate to have a new group to invent some slightly different version of all of the connects that we're doing. And in my experience, whenever you have something that's similar but slightly different, you inevitably end up having to create conversions and transformations between those two things, and somebody has to worry about them. And if they don't, then by trying to maybe solve some interoperability or make interoperability better, we create a different class of issue.
And one more thing, HTTP already is doing everything we all need to do in the forward direction. It feels natural to use that as the foundation if we want to get things in the reverse direction, instead of inventing a new thing and then do the forward direction once again.
All right, and for what's worth, I'd point out that probably one of the reasons Mask is really successful is because it was built on top of HTTP, which we understand very well and which is very extensible, and it's widely deployed.
So I'm going to disagree with those people who are talking about Mask. I think that's not relevant in this context. I think what's relevant in this context is that we want to be able to have the clients, the ones that are not involved in any of this stuff, be able to make HTTP requests. And the only protocol that we know understands how to transport HTTP requests is HTTP. We've worked out how to do the translation between the different versions of that, which is a kind of a big challenge for folks who are in the middle of things, but all of that work has been done. And as much as possible, I'm seeing the solutions that are being proposed in this space take advantage of all of that work rather than throw it away. And this is not Mask in that sense. This is keeping all of the HTTP semantics in HTTP. So I think from that perspective, that answers that question really easily for me.
Mia Kuleman once again. Your reply sounded more to me that you want to use HTTP as a generic substrate. And if we want to do that, maybe that's something we should actually work on rather than always having like the big HTTP stack. I understand it's very convenient if you already have a big HTTP stack, but if you don't have it, then it's a lot of overhead. And I mean, my assumption was not that there could also be use cases where you don't have HTTP from the client side. That was not a constraint I was hearing, actually.
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying, Maria. Are you saying you have a use case that doesn't involve HTTP for something like this? Or I'm not sure I understand your point.
We didn't talk about the client at all, right? Effectively. So that was also a very implicit assumption. If you're making that assumption, it's fine, but it was a very implicit assumption to me to constrain this to use cases where the client wants to send an HTTP request.
Could be something else.
That's an assumption worth stating. Another thing that I think is worth considering here, I work on a web browser, and I predict the very first thing that happens after this work starts is that I get asked to put a worker implementation into the browser. Because I always got the right idea there. I think I'll just sit down now.
So a service worker, perhaps?
I'll respond to that. Like we're laughing, but that's kind of what server push was doing, is like being able to push. MT's just shaking his head, but I spent a lot of time building a service worker that would pull requests off of a network that was given to it via the server, and it was horrible. It is a completely different protocol implementation, but it raises so many issues in that sense, and those issues are completely unrelated to what the use cases and the goals that customers have in mind here. You go back to my slides, it's very clear from that diagram what was happening to explain to a human. It just worked. They don't worry about this stuff. We need to, as infrastructure providers, with the customers, not necessarily their end users.
So regarding Martin's comment, I think, well, personally, one of the benefits of limiting the scope to HTTP is that it deals with resources being specified by URIs. So if we could say that we would be working on providing HTTP in a different way, then it will help us limit the scope and do the work, I think.
So we almost had drained the queue. Go ahead, Maria.
We have so much time. I thought I'd ask another question about scope. I think, so as you said this, I think it might be worth to do some standardization work because it's all very similar, and then we can benefit from each other experience or whatever. But is there also some kind of interoperability requirements? Are there any use cases where you actually have these boxes operated by different entities? Or is all the use cases we're talking about, it's always the same operator? And does it make a difference for the solution?
Oh, well, so in our CDN worker use case, we hope that the workers would be implemented, the HTTP developers that are outside our organization. And so that we could, so that instead of writing our own worker implementation that does the gateway thing and asking our customers to deploy it, their software would speak PTTH, and that we could interoperate.
I think he was shaking. Speak about
that. Well, I can answer from ZTNA perspective. So there are, as I said, plenty of proprietary solutions in this space, and the worker side, Cloudflare D or Zscaler Client Connector, Netscope Publisher, Microsoft, I think App Proxy, they're fundamentally doing very similar thing. And if we could standardize that and make some achieve interoperability here, it would be beneficial for everybody.
Marco Munizaga, Ethereum. Clarifying question, just to kind of see what all your use cases are. I think Yaroslav mentioned that HTTP requests could be done from both sides, or this was like a nice property for the solution. And I'm curious if this is something all your use cases would want or not. And I'll just mention that for my use case, I would want that.
So when I was thinking about this, giving more control to the worker, it was one thought of mine that the worker could still send control requests to the proxy. But then again, I think that this might not be necessary and might just make everything more complex. Because, for example, when we assume that the HTTP transport is used, you already have a lot of control mechanisms to shut down the connection, to indicate header fields when building this connection up. So I don't think it's necessary. It might just add more complexity from my point of view.
For the record, I don't know. So, but if I was to speculate, I could imagine if you were going to try and support the use of this reversing connection for other protocols, that sometimes their interaction models require spontaneity of sending stuff from one direction to the other during the connection. is like the vaguest way I could describe it. I'm looking at Francois sat in the front row here. He did some work around SSH tunneling. You know, that you got things like FTP. Sometimes those things don't quite work like we imagine HTTP does, where it's this very request response protocol. And there's some kind of server initiated thing. But whatever, I don't want to go into the terminology because it's late and I'm tired.
So for myself, we are only interested in doing in the reverse direction, and for us the resource that's being processed, being the HTTP URI, is pretty clear. I'm not sure how you would authenticate the URI that's being served in the reverse direction. So I don't know.
You're up. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm still fairly newcomer to IETF, but I'd like to understand, for example, security considerations related to all of this. I mentioned that when Mr. Oku was talking. When is that addressed, or does or with the working group?
I could take a stab at that. So first
Thank
of
you so
all,
much.
welcome. So in general, like what we're trying to figure out at this stage in the process is kind of the scope of the work. If assuming the work does continue either in the HTTP working group or in a new working group, then we would adopt a document, and an absolute requirement of that working group while working on that document would be to figure out the security. So like one obvious requirement is all RFCs need a security consideration section, but also we collectively have a responsibility to make sure that like the security has been thought through and we know where the sharp edges are and we've removed them or at least documented them. So it would be kind of at that future stage in the process where we would address those. Because you're absolutely right. You've isolated a few things that are going to be delicate to get right, and that could be horrible if we get them wrong, but it would be kind of at a future date that we figure those out.
Thank you.
Awesome. We were thinking of, since we've drained the queue, asking some of the questions on this slide to the group in the show of hands tool. It's also a great way to make sure everyone's signed into Mitico. Why is the font so small? So the first one is, did you understand the use cases described today? For the presenters, I'm hoping you don't need to vote on your phone. I'm hoping you understood your own presentations. All right, well, this one seems pretty clear. I see a no.
No, it's a mistake.
Oh, no. I see a no opinion. So if the no or no opinions would like to come to the microphone to like explain why, we're happy to hear that. But otherwise, I think we'll close this one. It seems to be pretty clear.
So let the meeting minutes.
Yep. And so I'll click the close it. And we had for the minutes 48 yeses and 1 no opinion. Thank you. And 0 no's. For the second one, we're thinking, do you think the IETF should work on this? We realize that this is not very clearly defined, but this being kind of these use cases and something that could address this problem space.
Without saying precisely what it would be, it's in its own working group or existing working group.
So similar to the previous one, if you said no, don't hesitate to get in the line to explain your position to us. We'd love to hear it. We'll let that one go for a little bit longer. All right. Yep. Okay, so I'll close it. So for the minutes, we had 40 yeses, 1 no, and 6 no opinions. I'd say that one's pretty clear as well. It sounds like their interest. And so a third one is, the main question here is, should people go and spend some of their time writing a charter? So do you think we could potentially reach a charter that makes sense. We're not asking you for a blank check on whether you would accept that charter, but is it worth it for the proponents to go and spend time writing one? I see MT going to the mic. Go ahead.
I hate being the guy to do this, but you just asked a different question to what you wrote. I would answer yes to that question, but I'm not sure about tightly scoped as possible.
I see. Okay, how about this? I'll re-ask the question. That's totally fair. Do you think an acceptable charter would that work for you, Martin? There. Okay. What? And
to you.
Do you think an acceptable to you charter in the space is possible? Yes, English is not my native language. Deal with it. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. You can. That's just I think we. Yeah. We and then I think one more is.
You review drafts or also drafts.
Yeah, this.
Why would people not? I would want to focus on drafts. Who's actually wanting to do it?
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right, thanks. We'll close this one as well. I'm not going to say it every time. If you replied no, don't hesitate. If you're in the minority, don't hesitate to go say something. I see a mark getting up. That might be why.
A tightly scoped charter would be one that just does the CDN use case, and that could be done in the HTTP working group, which wouldn't need a charter. The bigger thing is what we keep on trying to wrap our heads around, and that's where I have doubts that we can actually make progress in a reasonable amount of time. That's why I voted no.
That's totally fair. And one potential outcome is we define a tightly scoped charter and decide to not use that to create a working group and instead say this charter fits within HTTP, and then folks go off to write a document within the bounds of what that charter was.
What I also had heard was that people want to start small, but then with the option to expand. So I heard that some people expressed that opinion. Was that your sort of impression, or was it start small and never go bigger?
Since I'm still
because like everyone, so far in the IETF, I've never heard anyone saying, "Oh, I want to start with a really complex solution, and then I want to make it more complex." Every time I hear, "I want to start with something super lightweight, simple," and
yeah. I think that jump is the one that worries me, and I think we'd need a lot more description around that, and that might require something like a chartering activity. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Ted Hardy, Hannes, you're definitely right. The minute anybody puts simple into the front of their protocol name, you know it's going to be a bear. If this is the simple reverse HTTP protocol, we're doomed. So I didn't quite say what you said. I said something very close, and I want to distinguish them. I think we have to start with something that's a use case that's easy to understand and has immediate benefit. And I think the one that's the CDN related one is the easiest to understand, and it's the one where we'll know right away that people are getting a benefit. But I think Mark's point in the chat is absolutely spot on. Once you buy HTTP and you enable this, you can't rule any of the rest of it out of scope. And you have to take the design space knowing that the minute you've enabled this connection to flow the other way, that the waste of the internet is now available to run that way as well as that way. And all of the things that implies about what does the PKI look like for authorization, what does addressability look like, what do all of these other pieces look like for all of these use cases come into play. That doesn't mean you want to start by building something that handles all of them at once, but it does mean you have to take them into account from the beginning. And I think I kind of agree that we probably can't get tightly scoped, and our best hope is well scoped.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought, because it almost sounds like even if we pick something really concise, we need to think about the architectural implications for that in the future. And I see
yeah, that was Martin's point, and I agree with him.
Cool.
Colin Jennings, I mean, the S in zip is definitely for simple. But what I was really going to get to is, like, I think that when you try and describe, well, we make the smallest thing we could do or the simplest thing we could do or something, that's always just like meaningless towards actually getting anywhere. You need to say what things are in and what things are out. And I've heard quite a few different people say that at a minimum, slicing up the namespace needs to be in. And once I think you think about the basic things that you have, you've eaten quite a lot of the elephant at that point. I don't know. I feel like I'm not calling consensus on this or anything. There's no group or anything, but I'm saying, like, if you're saying that's in and then the other things you want, you're an awful long ways down this. I'm not sure how much there else is. And I think that seems like a good thing.
That makes sense. Thanks. Ben?
So in case it wasn't clear, I want to say that my view is that slicing should be out. It should be excluded from scope. We are not going to define a regular expression language for determining which URL paths are acceptable in this connection. We are not going to define a syntax for listing the methods that are allow listed or not on this connection. That stuff should be out of scope. What I do think we probably need is some sort of byte string container that can move a blob of bytes from the worker to the proxy. What's in there? Not our problem. It is possible that we don't even need that. There is a version of this where the only thing we have is some kind of identity for the worker. And if there's some information that you want to share with that the worker wants to share with the proxy, it has to do that completely out of band, but can link it via its identifier. I think that's somewhere in there is the cutoff for what we should have in scope.
Can I comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think I agree with Ben that we shouldn't specify how we slash the origin, but I'd point out that at the moment we use an identifier, then the identifier can always use to slash something by adding a slash or whatever. So I think we have to leave the blob there and let each deployment decide what to do with the blob.
Right. I don't think we should go into now discussing on how the bits on the wire should look like. I think that would be premature.
Aram, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, some of this last discussion is a little bit concerning. We shouldn't be throwing solutions out there without a proper consideration of what that means. Anyways, it seems like from the discussion, I'm starting to get the sense that we are tied at the hip with the HTTP group. So I'm not really sure how we could do this separately. There are so many implications to the traditional method that would come from, we don't live in a siloed world, right? So everything would have to be completely interoperable to live in an integrated manner, that it seems that there would be considerations all along the way of how traditional solutions would impact anything that's considered in this group. So I'm starting to get the sense that we're tied at the hip with the other group. Thanks.
And I can take a stab at answering that. And that doesn't mean, you're absolutely right that we're tied at the hip with HTTP, but that doesn't absolutely require that we do the work in HTTP. Another working group where we did mask, we specifically split off some things that could have been done in HTTP, did them in mask with tight coordination with the HTTP group. And in practice, one of the things we like to joke at IETF is that, like, we're going to go to the other room, but it's going to be the same people. We're going to be wearing different hats. And so even if we were to put something different here, the charter would require us to liaise with the HTTP group. But at the end of the day, it's often the same people in both rooms. So that ends up not being a concern in practice. The charter just allows people to focus on some specific thing and allows folks who care about other parts of HTTP not to have to look into this, for example. All right, we had one last question.
Did you actually read out the research?
Oh, that's true. I forgot to read out the results because we got, for the previous one, the question was, do you think an acceptable to you charter in this space is possible? And for the minutes, we had 45 yeses, 2 nos, and 3 no opinions. And then our last question is, would you be willing to help review or author drafts in this space? Like, if we end up chartering something or deciding to do something, like, are people going to actually do the work?
Really? You said no.
Oh, don't worry, Mark, you'll review it even if you don't want to. We know you.
Yeah, it's not as easy as just click no and then you won't have work. So.
All right. So it sounds like we have like 19 people who are willing to work on this. So there's like, and like, I'm assuming that y'all folks are interested as well, and you probably voted, or yeah. So there's a community of folks interested. Yeah. All right. So I'll stop that one. For the minutes, 21 yeses, 8 nos, and 7 no opinions. Okay, I think at this point we've gotten a good feel from the room. It looks like there's interest in doing this, in doing it at the IETF. People do the work. Mike, as the responsible area director for HTTP in the area, would you like to come share some thoughts on steps forward? It's sounding like spending time on a charter is going to be a good use of time, but tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, so I'm definitely glad to see all of the interest here and that all the use cases were not exactly the same thing, which was one of my concerns going into it. Which is not to say that we wouldn't work on it even if they were, because yay standards. But yeah, so it sounds like there's at least the possibility that this needs to be distinct from HTTP. So I think probably our next steps are going to be to create a separate mailing list, because I had deferred doing that until we saw how separate this work was planning to be. Let's spin up the mailing list. Let's work on a charter and maybe target a BOF next time around, or decide whether we want to hold a working group forming BOF at the next meeting.
Thanks. That sounds like a great next step. Once we have the list, we'll announce it on the HTTP list, because that's what we've been using so far. So we assume that folks interested are there for now. As in, on the HTTP list, we will announce what the other list is with a link to subscribe, is what I mean. And then we'll start working on a charter there.
Sounds good. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions.
Yeah, and thanks, everyone, for coming and for having a nice conversation.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you guys have any beginner plans? I'm gonna go.
If you want to tag along, feel free, but I don't know how big the group's going to be. And probably won't eat anything.
Take a picture of you in front of the potato.
I designed the potato. I get to be in it too.
So the name is terrible.
Yeah. Back on 6 years from now, when we're still not done. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. I missed the slides of late, so
Oh.
I was like, what? Oh, that's